Welcome to the Gray Path Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Tony B. Sorry for the bit of a delay. This episode should have come out 2 weeks ago, but a combination of, real life responsibilities with my primary business, as well as that pesky seasonal depression, which we have talked about on this show. A previous episode focusing on Poison Ivy from the DC Universe talked about SAD, seasonal affective disorder. So that was a nice, 1-2 punch to my schedule. And on top of it, this episode originally was supposed to be focused on Hoban Washburn, also known as Wash from Firefly. And I'll be honest, I sat down, I rewatched the entire series, I rewatched Serenity, I read some of the books and comics. I walked away with very little. Try as I might, I could not get a good angle to turn Wash into a bad guy. He is a treasure. So after some soul searching and procrastinating, which I'm very good at, I realized I needed to pivot this episode. I realized I wouldn't be able to properly do this series justice by talking about Wash because I can't really make him into a villain. The few points I found on him were things that are understandable when given context. But in looking, because I do love the Firefly universe, in looking at the Firefly universe, that's when I realized that there was a bigger fish to fry, per se, in front of my face the whole time. And that, of course, is what this episode today is going to be about. And that is on the Browncoats. Now, again, this is from the Firefly universe, the television show Firefly. It was from Joss Whedon. It was on Fox. It's probably the greatest tragedy in television history as far as a very promising show canceled because the network simply just didn't get it. And that's what it came down to with Firefly. The network just didn't understand it. They understood how much it was costing to make, but they did not understand what the show was. They played the episodes out of order. They didn't even play them to completion, and they canceled it after one season. Now, they did manage to get a movie a few years later called Serenity, which is very good. To fully appreciate Serenity, you should probably go back and actually watch Firefly. And then since then, because it has such a strong fan following, there are graphic novels, books, all kinds of stuff. So anyway, without further ado, we're going to dig right into the Browncoats. They're going to be the focus of our episode today. Now, traditionally speaking, the Browncoats are considered the good guys because the Browncoats were who Mal, who is the primary, he's the captain of Serenity. He's like the main character. Mal and Zoe, his first mate, they fought for the Browncoats. Now, what are the Browncoats if you're not familiar with the fandom? Well, the Browncoats are soldiers. They were a name given to soldiers who fought for the independent planets against the Union of Allied planets in what they called the Unification War. Essentially, Earth got used up. They created interplanetary travel. They found a bunch of Earth-like planets, and they started colonizing them. Well, the main core of planets, the core first planets that were created, they decided to bind together and take all the planets, basically putting under one rule. In doing so, they were trying to unify everyone, which is why it's called the Unification War. Now, some of the outlying planets, planets that were farther away from the core system, they didn't want to be under a centralized government, so they fought against it. Now, these soldiers who fought for the independent planets, their uniform was a reflection of their low technology. There wasn't a lot of tech that traveled to the farther reaches of the galaxy. And as such, their uniform was a brown trench coat, a red scarf, and that was about it. Their opponents, I believe, were called the Purple Bellies, and that's a tie to the type of battle armor that they wore because the inner planets had money and technology, so they were equipped accordingly. Now, traditionally speaking, the Browncoats are considered the heroes because Mal and Zoe fought for them. They were the little guy. They were standing up to the big bad alliance, the big bad alliance of allied planets. But I'm here today to say, if you really look at it, like just actually look at it, I don't think you need to look very deep. If you look pretty straight and clear about who the Browncoats were, they were no heroes. They were not bastions of truth and honor to be upheld. They were what happens a lot of times. They ended up basically devolving into a bunch of terroristic thugs. And we're going to talk about that today. One of the things, there's lots of, this concept of this, plucky insurgency against the established, regime. This is something you see in a lot of stuff. It's in Lord of the Rings. It's huge in Star Wars. I mean, the Empire the Republic, the Rebellion, all of that. Played very heavily in that. It's played obviously very, very heavily here in the Firefly universe, but it's a common motif, a common theme you see amongst a lot of fantasy and sci-fi series because it's something we can all relate to. And these things that we're going to talk about here, we're going to specify them to the Browncoats, but understand a lot of this can carry over into other fandoms with similar style storylines. For instance, the Browncoats, at the end of the day, they stood in the way of progress. Now, I'm not here saying that every Browncoat was a piece of shit thug terrorist, but what I'm saying is the movement as a whole was not these freedom fighters that were initially led to believe. I mean, the fact of the matter was, Earth didn't work out, which is why humankind had to leave Earth and find these other planets. And then they decided they wanted to ally all of them under one big government. Now, especially here in the States, we are horribly divided in the United States, just tremendously divided between conservatives and independents and liberals. We're just horribly split. I mean, I know it's that way in a lot of different countries. I can only speak firsthand about here in America, but we are incredibly, incredibly divided, especially where I live. I live in the heart of conservative country, and I'm not a conservative. I'm what I call a moderate. This is Bill Gray path. I like to walk in the middle. I like to look at both sides and kind of pick and choose based on how I want. But the fact of the matter is the Browncoats, in a lot of ways, stood in the face of like progression. They stood in the way of progress. They desired, and I'm going to use air quotes here, they desired freedom. But their desire for freedom, to me, if you look at everything, seems to be more of a problem with authority and a lack of compliance with the way that the galaxy was moving. It wasn't that they wanted freedom. They didn't want the freedom to choose to be allied. They wanted to be left alone. And I live alone on a mountain, so I get it. I don't live near people because I don't want to be near people. I don't particularly care for people. I don't like the way being around people makes me feel a lot of times. So I moved out into the middle of nowhere on purpose. So in a way, I get that. The Browncoats wanted to be left alone. But here's the thing. If you watch the show, if you watch the movie, if you read the books or the comics, if you're at all associated with the fandom, there's several things you'll see when they go, because most of the show takes place in the outlying planets, the planets that are farther away from the core. If this was Star Wars, they'd call it the Outer Rim. Basically, it's the planets that are farther out. So they're not really seeing a whole lot of fingers in the pie, if you will, from the Central Alliance anyway. And what do we see in these places? We see Old West style conditions. Now, that's played up because it's kind of the style of the show. It's that space Western. But again, we're seeing these low technology settlements where petty warlords, crooks, criminal masterminds, all of these questionable, predatory people have set up shop. That's not freedom. That's probably the opposite of freedom, because you have these warlords who are taking advantage of the smaller people that are out there. That's not freedom. That's just, you didn't want to be told what to do, or more importantly, you wanted to be able to take advantage of people, and you knew if the big central government was there, you weren't going to be able to do it. They were standing in the way of progress. If the unification war wouldn't have happened, all of the planets would have come under the Central Alliance, which would have meant that eventually, I mean, it takes time, but the progression and the updates and the increase in technology, all that would filter out to the outlying planets, and it would be a more overall better living condition than it would be with everybody fighting and picking and choosing and arguing and bickering amongst themselves, which is this quote unquote free society that the Browncoats were really pushing for. And this is actually the case with both in Star Wars, this is the case with the Rebellion. And it's been the case even in reality too, like in the Civil War and a few other places. A lot of the Browncoats, if you look at the things that they did and you look at, the impact that they had, they were terrorists to a lot of the people who wanted no part in this war or this resistance. They just wanted to, go out to a frontier and live their life. They didn't want to be part of the politics, but the Browncoats, their resistance kind of pulled everybody who just wanted to be left alone but wasn't militant. They all basically get painted with this big broad brush and pulled into this conflict that they wanted nothing to do with. Now, my best friend Lance, he pointed me in the direction. Now, I have not read this book. I am pulling from excerpts, but it is a book called Big Damn Hero, and it is a book set in the Firefly universe. And there's 2 excerpts I want to read about this, because I think this is very important to help kind of show everybody that there was a reality outside of the Browncoats and the Alliance, and just with the everyday people who got fucked because of the way the Browncoats wanted to be. So the following is an excerpt from Big Damn Hero. Browncoats bombed the hell out of my village rather than let the Alliance save it, a tall drunk yelled nearby. Jane could see how something like that would piss people off. The way he figured it, the rebels were lawless and disorganized. Their only real purpose was to make a mess of things. The Alliance had overcompensated, for sure, because they had the sticks up their behinds like they did now, but the Browncoats hadn't been no angels neither. Leastwise, that's what he'd heard. He hadn't taken sides during the war. He'd basically robbed soldiers on both sides of it. Neutrality was profitable. Killed my cattle so's I wouldn't provision the Alliance, the drunk bellowed. And there's more, but I'm not. So right here in this clip, we're talking about, and these are realities of war. And if we were doing this episode on the Alliance, I'm sure similar examples could be chosen, but we're focusing on the Browncoats here, the supposed good guys of the Firefly universe. So these people, in an effort to make sure that their enemies weren't going to be provisioned. Now, keep in mind, the Browncoats are supposedly fighting for freedom. They are supposedly fighting so that the independent systems can stay independent and not be part of this larger galactic-wide government. Yet, they bombed a man's village rather than allow the Alliance to save it, which would have made the Alliance look favorable to these people. That's a terroristic action. They went through and they killed a rancher's cattle so that they wouldn't provision their enemy, the Alliance. These are not things done by people who are fighting for good and freedom. These are things done by terrorists and bullies and people who are looking to just win. And this is the problem. The problem is they're focused on winning. It wasn't supposed to be about winning. It was supposed to be about their ideals. Now, here's another excerpt I'd like, and this is in that same block of text. I got these here missing fingers on account of Browncoats, the offended citizen raved on, spraying his closest audience members with a mist of saliva on the final syllabus, S. He held up a hand that was good for hitchhiking and picking his nose with not a lot else. They say, more spray came from his mouth, they was fighting for the common man, but you know they was just a bunch of goosey. Yet more spittle. Tip over a rock and you'd find one of them with his hand out, threatening to kill your whole family if you didn't pay him off. If Jane had known the Browncoats were so enterprising, he might have joined them. Yeah, another man chimed in. Or they'd wipe out your whole family if you didn't agree to let them stash their weapons in your root cellar. End excerpt. And again, so right here, it's showing more of the things behind the scenes. These Browncoats, these supposed fighting for the people, fighting for the good, fighting for independence, they're going to go through here and they're bribing people. They're threatening and blackmailing and kidnapping and doing all these things to these people because at the end of the day, maybe when they started, the Browncoats had a legitimate ideal, which I don't necessarily think is the case. Standing in the way of progress is rarely a good thing. But maybe they had a good principle to stand on at the beginning. But as the war carried on, and they were they never stood a chance. They really didn't. But as the war, closed in on them more and more and more, they turned into thugs and punks and criminals. And a lot of them went on after the war to become these warlords that Mal and the crew of Serenity run into. I don't know much about Badger, but I'd be willing to bet Badger was probably in the Browncoats, and he was probably one of these people who are taking advantage of everybody. I don't know for certain. Badger, by the way, if you're not familiar, is a reoccurring character in Firefly. He shows up on the show, shows up in the movie, and he's a criminal lord. But this highlights my point, which is the Browncoats went around, and that's the thing. They started a rebellion. They were not necessarily equipped to win, and that's the shitty part about the whole thing. Is maybe when they stood up and said, "Hey, we don't want to be unified," I don't think they were necessarily wrong in saying that, because who knows? Maybe they didn't actually want to be unified. There's a lot that goes into that perhaps they didn't think about, but maybe they didn't actually want to be unified. But they picked a fight against a foe they stood absolutely no chance in defeating. So as things got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse for them, they took it out on the people they were supposedly there trying to liberate. And that is a problem. In doing my research for this episode, I stumbled upon something on a few Reddit posts, which I thought were very interesting. And what it was talking about is it was talking about in the core worlds, in the Firefly universe, in the core worlds, sex workers, which are known as the companions. So Allura is a companion, and they are part of a union. There's no pimps. They enjoy incredible respect. Companions are almost on par with diplomats, you could say, as far as like their level of respectability. They're able to freely choose their clients. They're not like at a brothel where whoever comes in, they service. They have an updated system where they can basically blacklist abusive people to protect other companions. I mean, it's legitimate. But if you go to the independent planets, so if you go outside of the core worlds, these same companions, these same sex workers, which is a legitimate business, they have to hire mercenaries to protect them. They have to run away from local ranch owners. They have to protect themselves from gangs of hooligans. They have to worry about being kidnapped or stolen or attacked or killed, by like religious extremists. They don't have the kind of, I don't even know what you want to call it. They don't have the kind of respect. They don't have the kind of safety. They don't have any of the stuff that they should have had if they were in the core world. That's not freedom. That's not safety. That's just lawlessness, which is not something to be strived towards if you're trying to grow a galactic civilization. Let's talk about Mal for a second. So Mal's the captain of Serenity. Mal's tired. He's propped up. He's discussed frequently as some kind of idealist. He still wears his brown coat. Even though the only people who still wear brown coats are the people who purposely wear them to piss off the Alliance. And he's played up to be this kind of almost this Han Solo-esque idealist. But in reality, Mal knows he doesn't play well with others. He fully understands that in a regulated, lawful society, there's really no place for him. He makes money off of profiting off of other people's misery. Now, people may come back and say, well, that's not the case, because if you look, Mal does do a lot of altruistic things. I disagree. I don't necessarily think he does. I think Mal makes decisions. I mean, he does have a conscience. He's not a bad guy. That's why this episode is not necessarily about him. But he, at the end of the day, is not afraid to cross lines to get what he feels he's owed, or to get his people what they need. He's definitely an anti-hero in the sense that he's no Captain America. But the reality is he's also fully aware of who he is. Mal would never fit in the core worlds. He wouldn't fit in under the rule of the Alliance. No better than Han Solo would fit in the Imperial Academy. I don't remember what the fuck they've done in this new timeline with Disney, but in the expanded universe, that's where Han Solo was originally found. He was part of the Imperial, he was part of the Imperial Academy, and he met Chewie because Chewie was being beaten as a slave. So yes, in Solo, come to think of it, he does join the Imperial military, but he does also defect. So in just the same way as Han Solo would never really fit in the world of the Empire, Mal stands no chance to really fit in well in the world of the Alliance. And as such, he's hanging on to a long dead lifestyle that just doesn't exist. And his inability to just give up. I don't want to say give up, but to give up his pride and maybe work towards the better holds everybody back, including himself. You know, there's a scene in I can't remember if it's a show or the movie. I think it's a show. Sorry, it all kind of runs together in my brain. But there's a scene where the Serenity is they come upon a ship and they go in there and they're trying to salvage the ship so that way they can get, you know, some money. They find a ship, it's floating out in space, they're gonna illegally salvage it. And they end up getting run into by the Alliance. Like an Alliance patrol cruiser comes by, sees what they're doing, and they end up getting painted as, you know, illegal salvage. And some people might say, well, what harm is there? You know, who cares? Serenity's out there, it's just floating in space. They're going to go ahead and they're going to salvage it. But the thing is, it wasn't just floating out in space, it belonged to someone. Now, here, in the interest of this episode, I'm going to put on my hat as an insurance guy. You know, what do I do for a living? I'm an insurance adjuster. I deal with insurance. It's what I've been doing for over 10 years now. So the fact of the matter is somebody owned that ship. Somebody had a vested interest in that ship. Now, whether it was an insurance company, which I imagine it was probably insured in some way, or if it was an independent owner, somebody had a vested interest in that salvage. Now, it wasn't just floating out in the middle of nowhere. People knew about it, hence how Serenity came to hear their call and come to them, just the same as the Alliance cruiser shows up to see what's going on. Yeah, I get it's there. And if it didn't belong to anybody or if it'd been floating out there for a while, fuck it, take it. I don't see that there's any problem with that. But it hadn't been disabled for very long. And they're already out there trying to pick the bones clean. And the truth of the matter is yeah, maybe that helps Mal and his crew fly for a bit longer, which is important if he's protecting his own. But that's also taking food off the plate of whoever owns the ship, whoever insures the ship, whoever had a role in the ship. It hurts other people. And that kind of rugged individualism, it just doesn't fit in the world where everyone's moving forward together. But Mal and the Browncoats as a whole, they're relics of the past. They're relics of a past that doesn't even necessarily exist. They're just kids fighting against what their parents are telling them. Unfortunately, you know, the truth is, especially in this circumstance in the Firefly universe, they left Earth and they're populating all these new planets. So humankind has a brand new opportunity to really leap forward in a way that wasn't possible in Earth. But everybody has to leap forward together or some fall behind. And that helps, or that brings me to talking about the kind of stuff that goes on in American politics with not necessarily, probably, I'm going to focus on the alt-right, which is like the far right movement, because in a lot of ways they remind me of the Browncoats. I'll probably also draw a little bit on what happened in the Civil War in the United States. So one of the things that I hear, especially with where I live, that I hear consistently, and I've heard this all the way from when Trump got nominated or Trump got the presidency back in the fuck was that 2016, and all the way through to now after he lost the presidency and Biden got in. So one of the things I hear all the fucking time, and I heard it back then and I hear it now, is not my president, not my government. It's this mentality that just because the individual didn't choose for that particular leader, whether it be Trump or with Biden, that they somehow are separate from the country in which they live in. But let's be frank and clear here, and this will piss people off, and I don't fucking care if it pisses people off. If you live in this fucking country, you live in this fucking country. As much as I hated the Trump administration, and I'll come out, I don't like to get political on the show, but I'll be honest, I fucking hated them. I'm not a liberal. I'm not a conservative. I look at things as they are, and I hated the Trump administration. But as much as I hated them, as much as I cringed and sat there in shocked disbelief when Donald Trump won the presidency in 2016, I still set aside and said, you know what? I'm going to give the fucking guy a chance. I'm going to give him a chance. Who knows? Maybe his ridiculous con artist veneer, maybe it was just a show. Unfortunately, it wasn't, in my opinion. I'm not going to get into that. But throughout his entire presidency, never once did I go, not my president, not my government. The fact of the matter is I have chosen, just as everyone in this country has, we have chosen to live in this society. Is it ideal? Not even fucking close. Is the administration that's in the one you want? 50% chance it is, 50% chance it's not. But the fact of the matter is we're all moving forward together. We're all moving forward together. We're not, at least we shouldn't be fighting each other, because that's what holds society back. And that's what's so ingrained in this area, is this horribly conservative mindset that's like, people are so afraid that the world is going to leave them behind that they have to clutch their pearls like they're an old Southern lady, clutching their pearls to make sure that life doesn't move on without them. And as such, you get these incredibly conservative, super ultra radical mindsets. You get people popping up in militias, which is just bananas crazy in today's world. But in a lot of ways, there are so many comparisons to what happened with the Browncoats. I have absolutely no doubt in my fucking mind that if we lived in the Firefly universe where I live, everybody around here would have been a fucking Browncoat. 100%. And the crazy part is, a lot of the people that were supposedly being protected by the Browncoats were people who just wanted to live their fucking life. They didn't fucking care if the Alliance was their government or not. Because at the end of the day, and you see this a lot in literature, like fantasy literature, sci-fi literature, the only people that tend to fucking care who, like, what the government is doing is the people that the government are specifically subjugating. Everybody else, they don't fucking care. Like, if you think about it, I mean, I don't know who you are. I don't know where you are. I don't know what country you're in. But let's assume if you're listening to this in the US, in all reality, how much of a direct impact has the federal government really had on your life? Now, if you're living in today's society, if you're trans, or if you're part of the, I'm sorry, I may get this wrong, LBGTQ community, I apologize if I missed anything, then yes, you've definitely felt this, and you have a reason to want to stand up. But for the most part, most people, their day-to-day life is very infrequently disturbed by what's happening with the federal government. And the truth, and that's because the federal government is large, and it would be more so in a galaxy where multiple planets are being occupied. If your central government is centered out of, let's say, here on Earth, and we populated the entire solar system, chances are people living on Neptune would have very little concern of what the fuck is happening back on Earth. Who cares if the Earth government wants to claim they have purview over Neptune? Chances are nothing's really going to affect those people living on Neptune. But you're always going to get the fucking people, your rugged individualists, if you will, who are going to say, not me, no one's going to tell me what to do. I guess for me, I'm coming back and saying, at what point do you pull your own head out of your ass, realize that this ideology you're standing on is not necessarily right, proper, or even something worth standing on? You know, the alt-right here in the United States has gotten terribly bad. It's people who are already conservative trying to get more ultra conservative because they're trying to relive days that never actually existed. And you see that a lot with the Browncoats. Mal's that way. You know, Mal seems to me as the kind of guy who idealizes what the Browncoats were like, where he also is ignoring maybe some of the realities behind who they actually were as a people. That's no different than what happens with the alt-right. You know, they sit there and they go back and they, oh, I wish for the good old days and this and that. Good old days being times when they were able to subjugate minorities, or where they felt that life was better. But it's because the human brain has a wonderful tendency to whitewash all the bad shit and really highlight the good stuff. So this, I'm not saying that I have a, and just so everyone's clear here, I'm not picking a fight with the conservative mindset. I'm not. I'm conservative on some things. I'm picking a fight on the extreme side of it. And if we were talking about liberalism, trust me, it would be the same fucking conversation. I don't have a problem with liberalism. I have a problem with far left liberalism. But today we're focusing on the Browncoats. So far right, the alt-right. You know, I just see these people in Firefly and in, unfortunately, where I live, where they're just hanging on to this glorified past of theirs that overlooks evil deeds that were done. And this is no more true than the nonsense that went on the last, 5-6 years here in the US regarding the Civil War. So the Civil War, I imagine everybody knows what the Civil War is. If you're not from the US, the Civil War was basically a war between the northern colonies and the northern states and the southern states. And there was lots of different things in which it was fought over. Some of it was quote unquote states' rights. The federal government wanted a larger purview of power. The southern states wanted more individual. They wanted power to be kept on more of a local level, not a federal level. But one of the huge things that the Civil War was about was slavery, the enslavement of human beings. Now, was that the only thing the Civil War was fought on? Absolutely not. But it was by far the most significant, the most popular thing, one of the biggest things. The South really wanted their slaves. The North, although they did have some slaves, the North wanted slavery to end, and they wanted a unification. And the South put up their fight, and they put up their fight, and they put up their fight. And ultimately, the South lost. They lost the Civil War. The Confederacy was abolished, and we now have the United States. So they're all united. All 50 states are united. Yet, I can drive 20 minutes in any direction from where I currently am sitting, and I can find probably at least 5, maybe 10 Confederate flags. Now, keep in mind, folks, I live in Pennsylvania, which was firmly and staunchly fighting for the North. We were not part of the Confederacy. Yet I will find Confederate flags, at least 5 of them, maybe 10, no matter what direction I drive, if I drive 20 minutes in any direction. One of the craziest things I've seen, and I've seen this on many, many times, I see idiots who have the US flag and the Confederacy flag waving side by side. Now, if that's not a sign of a fucking idiot, I don't know what is. Yes, this episode is being very opinionated. The point being is there are people latching on to this concept of the Confederacy as if being a rebel is somehow an innately good thing. And if you think about it, in a lot of ways, our fiction kind of shows it that way. We have an innate desire to root for the little guy. In Star Wars, we rooted for the resistance, the rebellion. In the new trilogy, we rooted for the resistance. In Firefly, we root for the Browncoats against the evil alliance. We're constantly rooting for the little guy. But has anybody bothered to take a second and really fucking think about it? Like, okay, so there's all these Civil War monuments that are getting torn down. That's been happening in the last 6 years, and there's been all kinds of political hofo and fuss and muss about it. We're taking down this guy's statue because he owned slaves. We're taking this guy's statue because he was a douchebag. And these statues in the South that are, these icons of the Confederacy. Well, there's a couple fucking things to think about here. One, why are they really up anymore? People try to say heritage and stuff like that, but I mean, I guess from a local level, if the local people who live there and look at it every single day, if they're happy with it and it's not necessarily persecuting or hurting people, who fucking cares? Like, there's better things to devote your attention to. But it does highlight an overall problem of this not my president, not my government. I'm going to stick and follow the Confederacy that lost. Well, buddy, the Confederacy fucking lost. I mean, you hear Texas constantly say, well, we want to bow out of the US. We want to, what's the term? We want to, I can't remember it. Fuck, not liberate. Oh, secede. We want to secede from the United States. Texas talks about this shit all the time. We want to secede from the US. Okay. Texas has a lot. It's one of the few places that actually probably has a self-sustaining economy, and they do have a lot of natural resources, but they are one state. I think Family Guy did it best with the episode Pretoria, because Peter found out that his little plot of house somehow was outside of the United States. Well, what happened? He declared it Pretoria. It was going to be his own little country where he was sovereign. And the US basically just said, look, we're going to blow you into oblivion or you come back to the US. And he came back to the US. That's exactly what would happen. Like, you hear all these, keyboard warriors and these weekend, militiamen that are just like, oh, we're going to have our own independent state and da 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 da. I don't think I don't think most people, especially the people who are stocking up, and getting ready for these, the Civil War that everyone keeps saying is coming. I don't think many of them have ever stopped for a second and really thought about what happens after they declare their independence. Because you know what happens after you declare your independence? You become an enemy of the US. And guess what? Texas might be big. Texas might have a lot of resources. Texas cannot stand against the other 49 states, not to mention all the allies and everybody else that would come in. We don't live, and we tie this right back into what we're talking about. We don't live in a fucking bubble. We live in a global society here on Earth. And in Firefly, they live in a galactic society. And the fact of the matter is clutching on to an old relic like the Browncoats. And who knows, maybe they were right in the beginning, but they certainly weren't right by the end. They weren't. So, just all in all, I guess my final verdict, if you will, my final thing to exit this conversation on the Browncoats is to understand the Browncoats lost. They lost. They gave up. They lost. They stood in the way of progress and they lost. Step aside and let progress continue. At the end of the day, Mal is nothing more than a boomer who simply won't let go of his past. That's not something to idolize. That's something to feel sad about. So anyway, that's what I have today on the Browncoats. Again, I know this isn't an episode on Wash. I tried. I really did. For those who are interested, I found two things that were kind of that I thought maybe I could get an episode out of, which I'll go over with you is more of just like an added, like an extra feature or whatever. So in the first episode of Firefly, Wash makes Zoe feel bad for following the chain of command. Because Wash, he himself, has a problem with authority. They want to go on a little holiday. Zoe, which is his wife and the first mate to Mal, she's like, oh, well, as long as the captain's cool with it. And Wash, there's almost like a physical demeanor change on him. And he's like, oh, or we could just fucking do it. Like, he's not our babysitter. We don't have to ask him. So he kind of attacks Zoe for doing what she's used to doing, which is following the chain of command. And then the only other thing I was able to find is in episode 10, they kind of highlight throughout the whole episode that ultimately Wash is really jealous of Mal's relationship with Zoe because they are war buddies. Zoe and Mal are war buddies. They fought together. They watched people die together. They went through shit together. It does create a bond. Wash is very, very jealous of that bond. He's very, very controlling of Zoe when he feels that his place in her life is being challenged. But that was not nearly enough to make an episode out of. Plus, if you go on the flip side, there was a lot of ways in which I don't think Wash was necessarily out of line. So hence why I pivoted and we decided to discuss the Browncoats instead. All right, well, this was episode 9 in the 10-part series. There is one episode left. It technically should have come out today. It is not. It's gonna have to be pushed back a week. So next episode, which is the final one in the series, will be on Harry Potter's Dolores Umbridge. I have never in my existence met another heard of another fictional character that has such vitriol and hatred aimed towards it as Dolores Umbridge does. So I'm hoping I can do some justice by making her into a good person so everyone can yell and scream at me. After the 10-part series is over, we will be resuming our regular programming. I've got all kinds of really cool ideas for some episodes. We're going to do lots of team-up episodes. Hopefully try to get some more guests in over Zoom, people who don't live locally that I don't know and aren't close friends with. But we'll see. So as always, if you haven't had a chance, get over to the Facebook page, give it a like and a follow. Same with the Instagram and the YouTube. If you have any ideas for shows or fandoms to explore, go ahead and shoot me a line. As always, I'm your host, Tony B, and you all be safe out there.